Hello and welcome to another episode of Amiga Retro Adventures. Today we have in this fine plastic bag of slight green tinge to it. I'm sure it's special plastic, but regardless of that, this is an Amiga 500 motherboard actually, but it's one I've been looking for a very long time because it's a revision of the motherboard that was probably one of the first for the Amiga 500. It's a revision 3 motherboard. So when I bought it from eBay, the seller said it functioned, and we shall see, I guess. So one way to see if it works is to take it out of the bag. So without tripping over the tripod, I shall attempt just that. Excellent. Unwrapping anything is not my forte, so bear with me. I could just rip this to shreds, but that would be crazy, wouldn't it? Okay. You know what? Yeah, I think scissors will come in handy. So I just happen to have a pair lying about. So without hacking the motherboard to bits, let's start somewhere. Oh, look at this, an opening. You can already tell that the shield is a bit corroded or something like that. Yes, much wrapping happening here. Rip that there. Let me attempt to keep this in frame. Interesting. Cut. Here it goes. Any second now. Scissors are supposed to make it easier, you know. Much easier. Let me not get my arm in the way. Let's put it this way. Yeah, doing this stuff with the camera is not an easy task unless you want to see various body parts blocking your view, which is actually really easy to do. Okay. Looks like I have freed it from the plastic nightmare it was in, but at least it was wrapped well. Okay, so I shall remove it from that and throw the bag into the sink, or actually it ended up on the floor, but I'll tend to that later. So yeah, as you can see, there's a bit of definitely corrosion happening. Let's zoom in a bit. And I guess the camera picks it up okay. You can definitely see it's a bit of rust. I might be able to take some emery cloth or very fine sandpaper to get rid of that. I'm not too picky on it at the moment. It's more the motherboard I'm concerned about, but if it actually functions and all that fun stuff. So without moving the camera too much, here we go. Okay, set some stuff aside and see if this comes off. It actually does have some of the clips, or the whatever you call these things, holding the case on. Little tabs. I will gently remove this like so. Excellent. Like I said, I'll tend to the shield later. It's kind of neat about this. They actually have the this bracket here holding down the. I'll get zoomed in a bit more. Holding down the Agnes, or Fat Agnes. I think it's just Agnes in this stage. I think Fat Agnes applied to the 1 megabyte ChipRams, and the Super Fat Agnes was the 2 megabyte capable ChipRam Agnes chip. So this would just be the Agnes chip. And one way to tell that it's a revision 3, because it doesn't specifically say that on here. Let me take the camera off the tripod. Is normally on the Amiga 500, the revision will be here in this area, and as you can see, it's completely blank. But the Rock Lobster information, which is normally over there, is right here. There you go. So that's, to me anyways, a good indication that that is definitely not a revision 5, 6, or basically a revision 5 or higher. And like I said, usually that is printed in this area. The floppy drive basically sits in this area here. and then the logo sits there, and it's not there at all. So this is one of the first production, at least, Amiga 500s I'm aware of, revision 3. If there were earlier revisions like the missing 1 and 2, if anyone knows, you can just pipe into the comments below and let me know, because that would be quite interesting. So I'm going to put the camera back on the tripod since I don't want to make everyone suffer from motion sickness. There we go. So the main thing is now to see if this actually works. So I guess I will hook it up to various cords, power supply, and all that fun stuff. So I have the power supply over here somewhere. Bear with me. There are so many wires and so little time. This is a rat's nest of wires. I have other computers. So there we go here, the infamous power cord, which helps. And I will plug that into here. I always like to support this if I can. Of course you can't do that when it's in its case, but they do tend to move a bit. So that looks good. I will hook up the audio cable, which goes here, left and right, and that looks good. Of course, mouse, because that helps. I will plug that into the port. And of course, the video cable, which is right here, which goes around to this side. Let's see if I can get that on there. And excellent, that seems to function. Okay, one thing we are missing though, I mean I could turn it on as is, but I should hook up a floppy drive. Oops, that's, you can definitely tell what that was. That was the shield I was mucking around with, but here's the floppy drive that will work just fine. And carefully plug it into the correct ports. And I hate it when they don't have the actual keying for this, so I'm going to not plug that in right away, because I'm not sure if it plugs in this way or the other way. So I'm not going to do that at the moment. It's kind of neat too, the floppy connector is in a slightly different location. And pin 1. Doesn't really matter if I get this backwards, it just won't work, but I'm going to assume pin 1 is like the other ones, which is right here. Yes. This is very exciting here. One moment. Okay. And I can put that there. So I'm gonna just quickly go online and see if I can get an image on Google to how I should orientate this. I could also just use a multimeter actually as well and probe these to see which one is which. But regardless of that, let me move this a bit more in frame. Oh, there we go. Regardless of that, yeah, I'll be right back. I just want to make sure I don't get this messed up. I'll be right back. Yes, I have returned. Actually, I just used my multimeter to figure out what is what. So if I move this over a bit more here and zoom in, because that's what I do, zooming in to the connector. Kind of darkish a bit. Come on, there we go, move that out of the way. Yeah, right here is the floppy connector. Yeah, 12 volts, if you think about it, is on the left, and 5 volts is on the right. And you definitely don't want to get these mixed up when you plug into the drive, because that would be pretty bad. If you know, like I said, if you put the ribbon in backwards, the drive just won't work. But if you put the voltage on backwards, it's very bad. So the easiest way to remember is where that locking tab is. If this thing actually had that bracket, it faces this way. Or where the locking tab is not, the flat part faces the back of the board. Okay, so I will zoom back out again. And let's see what happens when I turn this on. And here we go. And I would say that is success. The noise you're seeing on the camera is the camera itself. Sync issues, obviously, with the monitor. since I'm not using a capture card device. And as you can see, it's ROM Kickstart version 1.2, which would be befitting of a revision 3 motherboard. Now revision 5s, the earlier versions probably would have had this as well, and revision 6s and whatever would have had the 1.3, and then once you got to the revision 8, which was the 500 plus, that would be usually with the Kickstart 2.0. So let's see if this actually boots up. So I will grab some discs, which I set aside just for this occasion. And if I knew where I put them, oh, found them. Here we go. So I'm going to use Workbench 1.3, and I will attempt to put this in. Oh, that's a good sign. Guess I could lower the camera a bit. One moment, where's the mechanisms? There we go. That's not lowering the camera at all. I'll just zoom in. It's easier that way. Come on, camera. There we go. No, it seems to be working okay. Apparently it's the 28th of December, 1927 or 2027. Well, there's no clock port or expansion memory that has a clock on it hooked up to this computer. And it's slowly booting, which is good, I guess. It is floppy access, so c'est la vie. Excellent. Oh, the mouse works just fine. Workbench 1.3 opens up just fine. And as you can see, we have, because it has on board 512K RAM, and after booting up, we're just above 350. So that seems pretty good. So it seems like it's functioning. I can do a quick test. There, I do have a test disk here. And I don't have a keyboard hooked up to this at the moment, but I'm assuming it will work. I hope so. But I do have a test disk that we will try to run right here. And I'll have to reboot the computer in the process, or at least turn it off and back on again. Okay, it is on. Excellent. So I'll put in the AMI test disk. Ah, much better. Excellent. Luckily I don't need the, unless I do the keyboard test of course, I don't need the keyboard for much of anything else, so I can quickly do memory. And as you can see, it shows the half megabyte, so 512 kilobytes of RAM. You can do a test on it as well. I won't bother running through it. It'll take a while, but as you can see, it's apparently having no issues. And actually I do need the keyboard because I can't push escape because there's no button. Anyway, that functions fine, but there's something I wanted to use this disk for, because as you can see, it has half a megabyte of memory. And without getting too confusing, I'll try to explain what I want to do. So just one moment, I will be right back. And I have returned. So what I want to do is, anything, just to let you know, anything I'm about to do is very easily reversible. I can put this back to the revision 3 goodness that it is. It won't affect anything. But if I do plan on using this in the future or sell it, it will have a much better potential of sale, or at least for me, of use, if it has more than the built-in 512K of memory. Now you can add a fat Agnes to this, which can address up to 1 megabyte. And if I had an add-in card here, another 512K, you'd have to make modifications for the fat Agnes, even though it can see 1 megabyte of chip RAM. By adding the card in here, it's still only going to see 512 here, and then the Gary will only see whatever's in here, because that's your basic, it manages some of your memory addressing. It will only see that card as another 512K of additional RAM, but it'll be what's called slow RAM, which is basically you have 512K of chip and 512K of the slow RAM, and it won't speed up the processor at all. It'll still have to share have bus contention accessing the chip RAM. So it never speeds up the computer, but it'll give you more RAM to run stuff. But a lot of games require at least 1 megabyte, even for the ECS. And there's even issues if you just run Workbench, or if you expand this with a hard drive and stuff like that. You definitely want, because you'll be in the Workbench environment, you can have more overhead. You definitely want more chip RAM, because chip RAM, of course, is used by the custom chipsets, which is basically the Agnes, the Denise, and all of that. And all that stuff. I'm sure there's another chip in there I'm forgetting about, but anyways, basically it's Agnes, Denise. It basically is your ECS chipset. Anyway, the ECS chipset is basically compromised of the Fat Agnes and a newer revision of the Denise, which I believe is 8373. This is 8362. So the ECS chipset is basically the upgrade. You can see 1 megabyte of chip RAM versus 512, and there's extra display modes and some minor fixes with the video output with the newer Denise. Now, ideally, they say if you upgrade the ECS part of the Agnes chip here, you should be upgrading the Denise. And I can do that, but it's not necessarily right away. But I do have a spare one that I can put in here just in case there's issues. Normally, it doesn't cause any problems. There just might be some minor glitches in the display borders if you're using the OCS, the original chipset Denise, with the newer ECS Agnes. But what I want to do, though, I was talking before, is I want to have at least 1 megabyte of chip RAM. Now, to do that on the revision 5s, and it's a bit trickier. Revision 6 is a bit easier. It requires, basically, there's a pad here by the ROM on the revision 5 and 6. You basically would cut that connection, and then there's actually 3 pads. You would cut, I think, the bottom 2 and join the top 2. And then you would have to, on the revision 5s, there's a trace coming from Gary that you'd have to cut by the expansion port. And on the revision 6 motherboards, it's a lot easier. You just have to, there's a jumper, I think it's JP7, jumper 7, that you would just cut, and that's it. So the revision 5s, it can be done okay. It's even easier on 6s. Of course, revision 8, it can do up to, it comes with 1 megabyte of chip RAM, and you can actually easily upgrade it to 2 megabytes if you want to. So that takes care of that explanation. Crudely done, mind you. Now with revision 3, I haven't really looked online, but it's very, very difficult to upgrade these to 1 megabyte of chip RAM, because I believe they've moved the JP2 connector that you need has been moved on this board, to right here. I think I'll zoom in for you. See how close you can see that. See how close I can see that. This cord out of the way here. Okay, where are we here? JP2, where are you? Yeah, it's right there. You would, now I imagine on this one, maybe it's the same thing, but I'm not going to try it, because normally, like I said, it's over here by the ROM on the other motherboards. It's like up really right up in this corner. Anyway, but so how am I going to add more chip memory to this? Plus, if I put in the new Agnes, it's still going to, I don't really want to try to modify this board. I'm sure there's a way to do it, but it's definitely more hack related than the other ones, more traces to be cut, and I imagine some other horrifying things to this, pretty much pristine functioning motherboard. So I want something that's easily reversible, and that is where this comes in. That was a very long intro to this, I'm sorry. This device, there we go. Let me zoom out a bit here so we don't do, oops, I always do that, always reversed. From individual computers, there we go, which are great for if you want Amiga hardware or Commodore 64 hardware. They still make stuff new to this day, and I own a lot of stuff that I bought from that. I've bought so much from them, I should be a shareholder, but c'est la vie, that's the way it works. So what this is kind of like the Mega Chip. The Mega Chip was an expansion that you could put into the socket here to give you 1 megabyte of chip RAM. Now this will give you 2, but you're saying, well, how are you going to modify this board to accept this? Well, I've never tried this, but in theory this should work, because this fantastic device, which I've used on one of my computers, now mind you, it was a revision 5, it's actually rather ingenious. And as you can see here, I'm trying to touch any of the contacts on the back. There's your Fat Agnes, but this comes with 2 megabytes of ChipRam. Is that going to give me 2.5? No. This actually replaces this ChipRam, so the computer won't even be using this ChipRam at all. So in theory, like I said, we're going to find out together. I've never tried this. This should work on this revision motherboard without, or any motherboard for that matter, without modifying anything, because not only is this chip here, you have this Gary socket adapter, which does the addressing magic for the memory. So this takes care of any traces being cut. This takes care of any of the ChipRam trying to be added to the system from, like here, from the expansion port. So hopefully, in theory, if I plug this in and we boot to Workbench, or I can run my test disk, we should have 2 megabytes of ChipRam on a revision 3 motherboard without modifying anything. And like I said, this should work for any motherboard, period. So you don't have to do any of the hacks. You don't have to do any of the modifications. So I haven't tested it that way on an unmodified, because I just simply have used this before on the revision 6 that I have with the cut traces and the jumpers that I had to use over here on the JP2. So I'm not sure if it will work without doing any of that, but I guess we'll find out. So this is going to be the ultimate proof, because the revision 3 motherboard apparently is one of the least compatible with some add-ons. So let's find out what happens. So I'm going to set this aside gently, and I am going to attempt to remove this here without destroying it. So I need to get a screwdriver or something in under this lip. So while I get that tool, just give me one moment and I will be right back. Okay, so I have returned, and now I will attempt to remove the retaining clip. I kind of wish all the other 500 models had this. This is, very few of them do, just in case there's chip creep and it tries to work itself out. And this chip does get warm compared to the other chips. So let me gently and methodically, there we go. Excellent. Wasn't so bad. It just basically, I don't know if you can see that, whoa, clips over the edges here. There's a small hole there. I don't think you can see that well on the camera. But anyway, set that aside, make sure I don't lose it. Now to extract that chip, which is 8371. And I believe that would be the NTSC variant of that chip. And I will remove that now. I will use this PLCC extractor, yeah, something like that. And hopefully get it out of the socket gently and methodically without doing any damage, or else this will be a very short video. I always hate taking these out, even with the right tools. Rock it back and forth. Been in here for a long time. Do not like that. I'm gonna switch it. Switch it around. These sockets are very old, and they can be replaced if you break them, but it's an unpleasant experience unsoldering everything. So I'm going to make sure that's seated again, and I'm going to try this again. Be very careful. There we go. No worse for wear. There we go. It's out nice and neat. Never force these, and never use a screwdriver to pry on the corners if you don't have this extractor, because I've done it before and it will happen to you. These will crack in the corner. Of course, when that happens, you don't have the proper tension, and the fact that the Agnes chip just doesn't do the graphics, it's also responsible for much of the timing of the computer. It's going to create nothing but a pain. You'd have to replace the socket to do it properly. So I have extracted this chip. The socket is nice and not damaged, and as you can see, there's pin 1, so I must remember that. You'll notice on several different revision motherboards, pin 1 could be over here, pay in mind the pin 1, because when you plug, now the chips are harder to do because they are keyed, but if you, I believe you have on that corner, it's slightly flat right there. But with the adapter I'm about to put in here, they're not. So you can put them in any way you want. And they're not forgiving. Power and inputs, you plug it in wrong, something horrible will happen, trust me. So sorry, I also have to remove the Gary chip as well. Let us bring Gary into frame as well. That requires yet another tool I never brought to the table. I will be right back. Okay, I found the tool. You can use screwdrivers on these, though you're going to damage the socket a bit, and you got to be careful. Sometimes if you can get it in, I'd like to use something a bit broader, like a butter knife, but it's better to get one of these. It's a chip extractor. Unfortunately, using it for the CPU, it pretty much extends its abilities. It's better for chips this size or smaller, but alas, it will work. And pin 1 is here because it's notched. Remember that, well, pin 1 is on that side, but anyways, the notch here, always make sure the notch on the chip matches the notch on the motherboard, so I gotta remember that when I put the socket in. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to attempt to remove this. Same idea, gently rocking back and forth motion. There, and then straight up. Just when you feel it about to give, then pull straight up so you don't bend the pins. And as you can see here, they're not too bad. And if you do bend the pins a bit, you can use pretty much anything to, like needle nose pliers or even your fingernail sometimes to pry them open, or like, you know, to space them correctly. So that chip, of course, has to go back into the socket. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to put the ACE, what's the thing called again? It's called something. I'm pretty sure it helps when you sell something. Yes, the ACE2 from Individual Computers. So I always like to put some contact cleaner on the contacts before I, insert the new components. And yes, I'll be right back. And I have returned. It's just basically in French. How about the English side? Yes, electrical contact cleaner. So I'll just give it a quick spray in bursts so I don't drown it, and then same thing with that. You can let it dry. You can use compressed air on it if you want, or you can blow on it, or whatever works for you. And you can put the parts in a bit if it's a bit damp because it does evaporate and it's not conductive, obviously. Or you can just wait for it to dry off. By the time I get to that socket, everything will be fine. So first thing I'll do is I'll plug in the Gary counterpart of this. So this helps with the memory addressing. And actually, now let me do the Agnes first, because Agnes is a bit more particular. So try not to, let's try to get all this in frame, touch any of these gold contacts. I'm having a problem keeping this in frame this time. But yeah, right there. Just make sure you don't, touch the contacts with your oily fingers. So what I'm going to do first now is insert this. That's better. So you can see it. You can see pin 1 is here. There's a little divot. And I'll have to, so the board has to be orientated like this, so pin 1 matches up. Now this chip here is an NTSC variant, so it will, by default it will boot to NTSC, but it's switchable to PAL. So any software run that requires PAL will use this. So it will be compatible with NTSC and PAL games or programs or whatever. So the pin 1 is here, and pin 1 is here. So I'm going to carefully plug this in. So it's lined up, and what I like to do is line it up so it's relatively level with the socket, and then push straight down on it with even pressure. I like to do it in one quick motion. I mean, you can do this any way you want, but let's try this. 1, 2, 3. It's in. Didn't make a snappy noise, but it's in. Okay, and just double checking, that's pin 1. I'm looking under the board, that's pin 1. So this is now orientated correctly. So now I need to install the Gary socket adapter. This extra wire, you can deal with it later. It doesn't really matter too much. You can just, use some zip ties and bundle it up and make it look neat. But for testing purposes, I won't worry about that right now. Now this one, you want to make sure you line up the pins, because it's got the machined, like the round holes, they're machined. They don't bend much. If you do bend one of the pins in the wrong direction, a lot of times they will break off when you try to re-straighten them. So same idea, you want to put even pressure on the socket. And this does not want to go in here. Let me check this again. Looks fine. Like I said, I haven't bent any of the pins yet, so... Okay, this one's a bit more stubborn. Yeah, being machined, they're gonna take a bit of a pressure to put in. The only thing I don't like about these kind of sockets is if you want to undo this procedure and reuse this socket, it might be a bit stressed because these pins are a bit larger. So the contacts might be a bit loose if you remove this. A lot of times to get a right way around that is either going to replace the socket, which would be horrible, or you just buy another set of this, like a blank one, without, obviously a different manufacturer, so it doesn't have this wire attached to it. So in other words, a socket similar to this one, and machined, and then it will fit in just as snug, and then you just plug in the chip. And I've had to do that with a few boards, and it works just fine. But you can see with the effort I had to put to get that in there, it's going to be a snug fit, but if I want to undo this, the odds are that socket's already going to be stressed, and it may not fit. It'll be a bit loose. But one way to get around that is you can sometimes, until you put the Gary back in without this socket, now back to the original socket, so without the adapter. If you can splay these apart a bit, and that would push it more against the outer part, and it would, like of the dual wipe connectors, and that will work pretty good too. Or like I said, or you can just get another socket similar to this off of eBay or wherever, and then replace it, and you'll be fine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to install this into this part of the socket. And with the machined sockets, they're not very forgiving. You have any bent pins, it's very hard to line them all up. And this is the tricky part. It's very easy to bend this, so you must be very, very careful. So what I like to do is see if I can get one side in. This side seems to be a bit off for some reason. There we go. That looks okay. And okay, it went in. I'm double checking that nothing is bent here. I can get the camera in a bit more. Yeah, of course you're only seeing the one side. Yeah, so just make sure that there's nothing here that's bent or out of place. And same thing with this side. It's really hard to get in on this angle with this camera. Come on, focus. There we go. And everything looks good. But what I'm getting at is just make sure that there's nothing out of whack there. So there we go. So that looks good. So I'm going to push down on it to make sure it's seated firmly. And remember the notch there. Sorry, my hand's in the way. The notch is perfectly aligned. So it's in the right orientation. You put any chip in backwards, it will be destroyed. At least there's a very good chance. Or if it doesn't get destroyed, it might destroy something else on the board. So everything looks good. So we're going to experience this together because I have never tried this. Especially like without any modification. Like I said, with the revision 3, I wouldn't even know where to start. I'd have to Google it. And even then, it's way more extensive to get extra ChipRam. So I will zoom out, and we shall see what happens here on the screen. What horrors await us, I wonder. Just double checking my work, everything looks good, and I'm happy with it. Let's see what happens when we turn it on. Let's see if it at least boots. Okay, so apparently it works again, my scan converter. I don't know what was going on. Sorry about that. But let's see if this actually, kicking the tripod, sorry. Let's see if this actually will witness 2 megabytes of ChipRam. Okay, click on memory, and look at that. 2 megabytes of ChipRam detected. And I can do test all memory. It will take longer to do the first pass because there's more memory. But it looks like that part is successful. So I basically upgraded this revision 3 motherboard to 2 megabytes of chip RAM using the ACE2 from individual computers. So the fact it has 2 megabytes on board and doesn't use any of the memory on the Amiga, and it uses the Gary addressing adapter, it gets around any hacks that you have to do to pretty much any motherboard. So I imagine this works on a revision 3, it'll work fine on a 5 or 6. Excellent. So as you can see, it passed the first round of tests. So let's boot to Workbench and see if good old Workbench 1.3 will show lots of memory. So I will find the disks wherever I hid them. Yes, I like hiding stuff from myself. Perfect. It's always like hide and seek or something like that. So I'm going to put this in and power cycle the computer. And let's see what happens. Now if you want to upgrade the ROM on these, there is an adapter board you can get for the ROM socket, because once again the addressing is different for the ROM. So anything above a 256 kilobyte ROM will not work properly, and depending on the revision motherboard you have, the jump ring and other hacks you have to do is a bit of a nightmare. And I had an episode, I'll link one of my videos previously that showed that ROM socket adapter, which hopefully you can still get on eBay. I've seen where you can build it yourself with the parts, and sometimes the person who's selling it will assemble it for you. Definitely worthwhile, because you want to upgrade this to a different ROM, like 2.0 or higher. Once again, you don't have to do any hacks, see soldering. And the beauty of all of this is that you want to put this back to stock, it'll be just like it was before. There's no mucking around with solder and all of this stuff. And look, lo and behold, 1.94, 5 megabytes of RAM left. So as you can see, it worked out rather well. And the system seems to run just fine. But I guess the ultimate test is we will try a game, shall we? Alien Breed. That's what I happen to have sitting here. So that is perfect. So I will see how this works. Pop out this disk and put this aside. Make some noises, and the boot disk, because it says boot disk, so I guess I should not put in disk 2. Okay, I'm gonna turn the computer off. If I hooked up the keyboard, I could just reset it, but I don't have any spare 500 keyboards that aren't in 500, so I don't really want to rip one apart just for this. But I imagine it'll work just fine. And power cycle, and this game does run in PAL, so we shall see what happens. Yeah, so this did not auto trigger into PAL, which was my concern. You'd have to use a program called Degrader, I believe, for that. Yes. Oh goodness. What I'm going to do is, because this thing is content on staying in NTSC, I'm going to make a degrader disk, and then we'll just prove that this will also work in PAL mode. So one moment. Okay, I've returned. So I was on my Amiga 1200, I went on Aminet, I downloaded a tool. Instead of using Degrader, Degrader is good for disabling caches, plus, switching NTSC or PAL modes and doing other stuff to make an accelerated Amiga, or expanded one more compatible with games. But I found one that just simply basically asks to reset your computer and into PAL or NTSC mode. So I just had I made a floppy here, so it'll just auto boot and run the program. I think it's called reset.pal, and then it will ask me to click on things, and then we'll see what happens. So here we go. I shall insert this disk, and I will get the camera actually looking at the screen here. There we go. Okay, so now we will insert the disk, and I made it auto boot, so it'll boot and directly run the program through a modified startup sequence I made. And there we go. So go ahead, make my day. Just kidding. Actually, I don't know what that means. Anyways, I shall click on this and pull the disk out so it doesn't run it again, and it should boot to PAL mode. And I already can tell because the screen is a bit, the disk icon's a bit smaller. So now it's ready. I shall put in the Alien Breed disk again. And now it should run in PAL mode, which is much better than before. And you can already tell because the text was not visible last time on the bottom of the screen. So now we are running in PAL mode, which is perfect because that's the way the game was intended to play. And like I said, some games won't even run if it's in NTSC mode. Same thing here, we didn't see the whole line at the bottom of the screen last time either. So this is now running much better. And we are running in PAL goodness. So if you do buy one of these and you have an NTSC, like the chip on it is NTSC, so NTSC Amiga or not, it's gonna run in NTSC mode until you use a piece of software to kick it into PAL, which is no big deal. You just make that boot disk like I did, or use degrader or some kind of utility, and you're good to go. Now some programs actually detect that and automatically switch the computer into like the output into PAL mode for you. You don't have to do it manually. And there we go. We have, yeah, because if you were in NTSC, this bottom bar you wouldn't even see it, which is very annoying. I guess you should get some keys. But pretty much there you have it. So this is a quick way, regardless if you have a revision 3, if for some reason, because they're one of the original 500s sold, up to a revision 6. You could probably even try it with probably even the revision 8s, I imagine, because they only come with 1 megabyte of chip RAM. This would give it 2. But so there you go. I guess I should just stop talking since I can't anymore. But anyway, that's it. And like always, thanks for watching. Actually, I wanted to add one thing before the end of this video. Now, as you can see, I still have the 2 meg RAM expansion installed from individual computers, the ACE2. And I also have the OCS 8362 Denise chip installed. Now, I tried replacing it with the other ECS counterpart to complement this, the Fat Agnes. This is the 8373, normally found stock in the, I believe, A500 Plus, so the revision 8 motherboards. But when I installed this into this socket, I got no video at all, and the computer was working. I could hear the drive clicking and all that fun stuff, but there was no video. And to rule out the the scan doubler that I have hooked up, there was indeed no video. So it appears that if you do go this route, and it'll work fine, you can use the ECS Agnes, but you cannot use the ECS, Denise, on a revision 3 motherboard. Now I know they work fine on revision 5s, revision 6, I've tried all that, so that there's no worry about that. And the odds of you having a revision 3 motherboard is very unlikely. I'm pretty certain this was pretty much the first production model that was ever installed. But the reason being about the video, I pulled up the schematic, well, the pinouts for this on using Google, and I believe pin 32 and 34 show up as NC or not connected. And I don't think this motherboard, has actually anything connecting to those pins, because if I look at the pinouts for the 8373 online, pins 32 and 34 are actually used for sync signals and whatnot. Sorry about that. And that might explain why there's no video output, especially as sync signals probably kind of important for the video output if that's indeed what it's used for. I didn't look into it to too much detail. So it must be the older boards, or sorry, the newer boards, the revision 3 being the older board, literally has nothing connected to pins 32 or 34 at all, because it doesn't produce any output. Even though the computer boots, you can hear the drive clicking and all that fun stuff. There's probably absolutely no connections on this motherboard that feeds the signals required for this pin. Being that, you know, the OCS Denise, even though they're not connected on the newer motherboards, revision 5 and up, probably actually has the signals that this guy needs. So if you ever do this upgrade path and for some reason you do have a revision 3, which is probably highly unlikely, but you never know, it'll work just fine with the OCS Denise. That's pretty much it. But one thing I do want to kind of add here, and you've probably seen it a few times with me scanning around, or panning around I should say, with the camera, is this. This is something you'll never see on any other Amiga motherboard, and it's another crystal, clock crystal, of course, component combination thrown in here. And when I've seen this online, I have seen some pictures of this populated, and if it is populated, this crystal here is actually not present. So the system crystal, which this is an oscillator actually, which puts out its crystal plus, like the oscillator, puts out the roughly 28.375 megahertz required for the system clocks. This would be missing on some boards, and this would be populated. So I'm not sure why they did this. You either have one or the other. They both produce a system clock. This one even has a variable cap. I don't know. And the weird thing about this motherboard, there's almost no information. I can't find schematics, almost nothing. You type in revision 3, pretty much you get very limited results. Revision 5 motherboards and up, no problem. So this really makes me believe that this was probably the very first production A500 motherboard. So that's pretty much it. What I'm going to do though, because I have lots of Amiga 500 motherboards, I'm going to put this back to stock and leave it as is, and then maybe we'll revisit this maybe in a future episode once I get everything all cleaned up and operational. Sorry about that, the battery died on my camera. I was kind of hoping to squeeze in a couple last words before that occurred. But pretty much that wraps up this video. I hope you found it interesting, and that'll be pretty much it. So, if you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. If you don't, you know what to do. But if you want to subscribe to the channel, please hit the subscribe button, just so you can be alerted of more exciting videos, which will be soon to come. And that is it for today. And like always, thanks for watching.